Hi friends, so great to be with you. I'm speaking to you from very chilly Saskatchewan today, but really excited to have the opportunity to spend some time together. In fact, I've been tracking with you on the theme of relationships and friendships over the last few weeks, and today I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. This whole theme of belonging and a family and a friendship is one that's pretty near and dear to me as well, and so I'm excited to spend some time thinking about it. Liz was talking about how loneliness is an epidemic, and I think we could all attest to at least some measure of that in our lives and in the lives of those that we care about. But she also said that it's not inevitable. And then Jeff was talking a little bit about the importance of us being the ones that initiate, not only in terms of relationship, but also in terms of meaningful relationships. And there's so much about what both of them said that really resonates with me on a very deep level. But if I'm honest, there's another part of me that goes, yeah, but what about when it gets hard? I don't love conflict and I don't love working through the hard stuff. I don't know if you relate to that at all, but if you do, come on with me and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Because there's so much in the Bible that talks about relationships, isn't there? There's so much that talks about friendships. We could look at, for example, the Old Testament and the friendship of Jonathan and David, or the close relationship of Ruth and Naomi. We think about how Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden, had this close conversation with God, and how God describes his relationship with Moses as talking face to face as one talks to a friend. And then as we move to the New Testament, of course, we see countless other examples as well, don't we? Draw out maybe just the example of Jesus with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But then when we come to the teachings of John, the Gospel of John, which we're going to look at today, and the epistles of John, it's almost like there's a theology of friendship. There's a theology of kinship, of family that gets developed that's quite rich and profound and meaningful. So we're going to be looking today at John chapter 21. So if you happen to have a Bible, feel free to flip open to that. And just as you're moving there, I'll just give you a little bit of backstory to this particular piece that we're going to look at, John chapter 21, verse 15. So this is after Jesus has died on the cross and been raised, and after there has been an empty tomb, and the disciples are kind of confused about what's gone on. We can imagine this has been a very confusing time for them. And so they decide they are going to go out, they're going to go fishing, which is what they were used to doing. And they're out fishing and they let down their nets time and time and time again. And unfortunately, nothing is caught. And so they're beginning to get weary. They decide to come back in. As they're getting close to the shore, they see someone on the shore who has a little bit of a fire, and that person instructs them to let down their nets in a different place, to let down their nets one more time. And they do that, and we read that they bring up this massive amount of fish. And as this happens, the disciples, and Peter in particular, begin to realize that's Jesus that's on the shore. That's Jesus that just told us to do that. And they begin to move with speed towards Jesus. Now, a little bit of backstory. You may know the story of Peter. He's the impetuous one that we see throughout the Gospels. He's the one that Jesus called to follow him and became a close friend of Jesus's. James, John, Peter, Jesus. They're kind of like very tight friends. And at one point, when Jesus knew that he was going to die, he began to talk about this with these close friends. And Peter made this very audacious friendship statement. He said, "That's not going to happen. And if it does, I will follow you to the end. I will die for you. I'll be there for you." And Jesus looks at him with some sadness, perhaps, and says, "Peter, before the cock crows 3 times, or before the cock crows, you are going to deny me 3 times. And that's exactly what happens. And so now here we are some days later, and Peter's been carrying this kind of sense of shame, maybe this regret about what happened, maybe this understanding that he acted in a way that was so the opposite of friendship, so the opposite of what Jesus had been teaching about family and about the unity of God, Father, Son, and Spirit, which we read about through John 14 to 17. And that beautiful high priestly prayer in John 17, where Jesus prays that we would be one, that we would be family, that we would be kinship in spite of the challenges that are going on around us. And Peter realizes he's messed up big time. Now, I can relate to this on so many levels. When I was growing up, I have 2 brothers, an older brother and a younger brother, and we would often mess up, and we would often get into fights and squabble, about little things. And my mom had this practice. You may have had this when you were growing up too. She would make us stand on either side of a dirty window, and she would give us each a cloth and some spray, and we would have to stay at that window until 2 things had happened. First of all, that window had to be sparkling, shimmering clean. And second of all, we had to be laughing. We had to be friends again before we were allowed to leave that window and go in and have dinner or whatever. As I've reflected on that now as an adult, I've often thought a lot of organizations, a lot of churches would do well to have a window washing station at the entrance of their building. Because there's something about that being required to stand face to face and kind of sort things out, isn't there? My mom would always say, your family, you have to work it out. You're going to have to go figure it out. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You guys go figure it out. And in this story of Jesus, we see Peter and Jesus figuring it out, working it out, getting into the hard stuff. Now, when I was a little kid, that seemed like big stuff. I don't even remember what it was about. It was little. But here we have a story where Jesus reminds us that even when things get really hard, even when people make major mistakes, he models a way for us to do the hard work, to pay our dues, and to work through it. And I think there's at least 3 really important things that we can pull from this text. There's probably way more, but I want to just focus on 3 for today. And the first one is, newsflash, there's no perfect people. Even with the best of intentions, people are going to mess up. People are going to hurt us. They're going to do things that are the opposite of what we would want from them, and perhaps the opposite of what they would want to be themselves. A few years ago, I was studying Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. And when I was focusing on Jesus, the truth, I was praying about, what does this mean that Jesus is the truth? What does it mean to follow the truth? What does it mean to live the truth? And I was praying and asking God, is there any places where I haven't been living or speaking the truth? And immediately this story came to mind of something that had happened a few years before that. And it was to do with a good friend of mine. And as soon as I remembered it, my heart just sank because I knew that I was going to have to go and make this right. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to confess to what I had done. I didn't want to tell her that I hadn't been completely truthful about this situation, and that I knew that in telling her it was going to hurt her too. But I knew I had to do it. And so I texted her. I asked if we could meet after work. I went over to her house. She said, hey, Ellen, come on in. I said, no, I'm not going to step through your door. I don't know if you're going to want me to come into your home ever again after I tell you this story. And she said, Ellen, we're good friends. You can tell me anything. And so standing outside her front door, I told her what had happened, and I confessed and I asked her forgiveness. She was incredibly gracious. And she invited me into her home, and we became even better friends as a result of that very hard conversation that we had on that day. Now, that doesn't always happen that way. I know that. Not everyone is as mature as she is. Not everyone would be able to work through it the way that she did. But there is something in that story, and there is something in this story, which I think is really important. And that is, there are no perfect people. We are going to mess up. But Jesus invites us to a different level of authenticity, to a different level of friendship. He invites us to follow the way that he does in terms of seeing people and calling them into their true self. Because in this story, we see Jesus and Peter now at breakfast. And Jesus says to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Now, when he says, "Simon, son of John," that's kind of like a little twig to us as a reminder. I've heard that before in the Gospel of John. That's the language that Jesus used when he first called Peter to himself. And here he is calling him to himself again. "Simon, son of John, I see you. Come to me." And he says, "Do you love me more than this?" Now, there's something here, something that tells us that love is at play. And he said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he, Peter, said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him a third time, and he said to him a second time, "Tend my sheep." Then he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Now, we can kind of have a little bit of empathy for Peter here, can't we? Because we understand that this is the transcendent Christ. This is the resurrected, omniscient Jesus. He knows all things. He knows that Peter loves him. So why does he invite him to say it 3 times? Is he just kind of rubbing it in? Or might he be doing something else? Might he be saying, "Peter, I see you. Do you see yourself? Peter, I believe in you. I know that what you did back there was wrong, and I know that that's not the real you. I'm inviting you to come into the fullness of who God created you to be." When our kids were teenagers, one time one of our children was kind of like acting in ways that were hard for us to understand, quite candidly. And I remember one day I was just exasperated, and I said, "I don't know who you are anymore." Now, if I could go back, and of course we can't, but if I could go back and do that differently, I think I would say something different. Because I did know who they were. It was more that I wanted to say, "I see who you are, and this isn't it. This behavior, that's not the true you. Let's come back together to explore who you really are." And I can't help but wonder if that's what's going on in this story. That Jesus 3 times is saying, "Do you love me?" And Simon Peter, "I see you. I see you." He's providing space for Peter to look into his own heart, to deal with his own stuff, his own shame, to choose again who he wants to be, to start afresh. There's something really powerful in that, isn't there? It's as if he's saying, "I see you." Those 3 words are so powerful. There was a time not that long ago when I was going through a pretty rough time, and I had a lot of uncertainty about some decisions I needed to make, and I didn't even feel comfortable really talking to people about it. And a friend of mine sent me this little note, and I opened it up, and it had those 3 words on it: "I see you." That's something quite powerful. To have someone slow down enough, care enough, love me enough to look past some of the stuff that I was doing, to look into the heart of who I am and who I'm becoming and who God's designed me to be, and to say, "I see you. that invited me into a whole different level of reflection and invited her and I into a whole different level of relationship. So we've said that there are no perfect people, but we've also said that Jesus models a way of addressing it when things go wrong in relationship. And the third thing that I'd like to pull out from this text is that there's something in that way that Jesus models for us there that actually is a transformational opportunity for both parties, for me and for someone else. I believe that Peter grew into more of the man that God had designed him to be as a result of these 3 questions, as a result of this encounter, as a result of working through some of the hard stuff in relationship. John Ortberg once wrote, "God uses people to form people." That is why what happens between you and another person is never merely human-to-human interaction. The Spirit longs to be powerfully at work in every human encounter. When we are loved enough to be invited into who we truly are, to work through the hard stuff and come out the other side stronger, that's evidence of the Spirit at work in us. That goes way beyond any kind of pop therapy or psychobabble around believing the best in people and all of that kind of stuff. This goes way beyond being naive or being unwise. Please hear me. I'm not talking about staying connected in relationships that are toxic or abusive. I'm talking about that opportunity that Jesus models for us and invites us into to do the hard work of building lasting and meaningful relationships that are transformational because God exists in the space between us. That's a pretty interesting calling that we have when we think about it. The calling to be used by God in such a way that we allow the love of God to permeate us, we allow the love of people to touch us, so that we can become ourselves and we can invite others into a deeper awareness of who they are as well. Now, as I said, we can't predict other people's behavior. We can't fix everything. As much as is possible with you, be at peace with all people. But certainly there is a command, an invitation, an opportunity here for us to move beyond the superficial level of relationships that we so often settle for. And so to recap, there are no perfect people. That can move us towards skepticism or it can move us towards compassion. Jesus models a different way of interacting when these happen. And as we follow that opportunity that Jesus presents for us and models for us, and as we do this prayerfully and understanding that we do it in the presence and for the glory of God, that enables us to actually grow in ways that we couldn't otherwise. And it invites others into a growth opportunity as well. And friends, decades into this journey, I can tell you that I know from the deepest part of me that this is true. And I also know that I cannot do it on my own strength. And so with that in mind, if you could close your eyes and pray with me, I would love to pray the prayer of Ephesians chapter 3 over us. And the words go like this. I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, might have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge. I pray that you might be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. And Lord, this is our prayer. We are thankful for the relationships that you provide for us. We are aware that some of them are troubled, and we are aware that we need your help. We ask for your grace, and we ask for your courage, as together we seek to journey as brothers and sisters, as friends, as family members, as we seek to live in ways that will bring glory to you and will set each other free. For we ask this in your holy name. And all God's people said, amen. Amen and amen. Thank you for the opportunity of being with you. So good to spend some time together. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.